And I'm Alan Wallstetter, President of School Improvement Partnership, bringing you the first School Improvement Partnership News Hour, news you can use. And now we wanted to go to Alexis Turner, the Director of Business Operations at School Improvement Partnership. Alexis focuses on streamlining and innovating our workflow processes, and she's been a principal architect of automating the process for the charter schools that we work with on their continuing disclosure reporting. As Alexis will discuss, the information to be provided by charter schools may be changing.
We've talked about the political and financial landscapes in this current times, and we've even touched upon the environment within the charter schools right now. Another important area to keep in mind is the communication between charter schools and the investors during these times. So initially, obviously, school closures came as a shock to students, teachers, and investors all alike. And there was a question of whether schools would be able to keep up with operations in the sense of academics and just day-to-day operations, but even further than that in terms of finances. So from an investor's perspective, is a school going to be able to keep up with their bond repayments for the schools that have that outstanding debt? And additionally, there were some schools that when these closures hit, they were in the middle of construction projects for their school facilities. So then there's that added factor of the obligation to the contractors and making sure that those payments keep up to date. So now we're at a time where we've gone back to school. We're seeing a mix between online and in-person lesson plans. We see a lot of hybrid teaching models, but I mean, it's safe to say education method is one of the main things that's changed in this era of really the new normal. So while COVID itself isn't a predefined material event, as Dean had kind of alluded to earlier, COVID obviously is not written into Rule 15C as a material event, but the impact of COVID on the education system was really just that. It was material. And that emphasized the need for an evolving reporting process to keep up with these changing times and to really keep those communication channels open throughout this evolution of the new normal. It also is possible that with the school closures, there were material events that popped up surrounding it. So for example, when the finances got a little unsteady, some schools might have had to draw on their debt service reserve funds, which would be, of course, a material event. So really, it's a lot of instances or a lot of reasons that COVID could really be something that we should disclose to investors. And SIP advised this for our own reporting schools back in March, and we complementarily filed voluntary disclosure reports surrounding COVID restructuring for our reporting schools. And then subsequently, the SEC announced this as a formal recommendation in May. And the importance of this was really to keep the investors informed so that they're aware of any contingency plans in place and what school leaders are doing to kind of lay out what education is going to look like and how the building's going to continue to operate. And the benefits are really twofold. It gives peace of mind to the investors, but it also gives peace of mind to the school leaders and the CMOs by letting your investors know that there is a contingency plan in place and there's things being worked out. It really prevents you from opening yourself and the school up to any liabilities. And conversely, if you weren't going to be open about how things are restructuring, that can open up the schools to certain liabilities. So now more than ever, it's really important to have a good continuing disclosure agent, whether that is School Improvement Partnership or someone else that's just really, you want to be focusing on the quality of your continuing disclosure agent. So as I stated, in May, the SEC released the statement encouraging voluntary disclosures, and they let borrowers know that the regulator was encouraging issuers to post forward-looking information related to the COVID-related disruptions on financial and operating conditions. So essentially to post these voluntary disclosures with projected budget and revenue information. So that might look a little different than normal reporting. We kind of do the budget to actual, and now we're shifting our focus to projections. What do you think this school year is going to look like? How do you plan to accommodate for certain changes? And certain associations have advised that you really should clearly identify and acknowledge which areas of the disclosure are assumptions as opposed to concrete data. But the SEC also stated that it's not going to second guess any of these types of disclosures that are made in good faith on forward-looking assumptions. So that's kind of their way of trying to alleviate possible hesitation from borrowers and investors on this forward-looking disclosures.
Sure, Alexis, as you're saying that, so with the material event filings that School Improvement Partnership did for its reporting schools, what are some of the data points, for example, that charter school borrowers would have given, in this communication that you sort of just perfectly referenced for bondholders that maybe a year ago would not have been of interest?
Sure. So we did this voluntary disclosure twice. We did it in March when things first started closing up, and then again in July before a lot of schools were starting to reopen and go back to their classrooms or go back to online classrooms. So we looked at kind of three key areas. We looked at emergency planning and on-site safety and prevention methods that are in place within school buildings. We looked at academic operations security, so how schools are going to be delivering their education. And then also, of course, financial security. So an example of this would be per pupil payments and the addition of unbudgeted costs in relation to implementing new teaching strategies. This could include, providing iPads for students or Chromebooks, internet accessibility to students who might not usually have it, and the pathways that schools are going about getting this internet to certain neighborhoods or students or whatever it may be. And just there's costs associated with that, obviously. So our March statements focused heavily on what are these unprecedented costs. And then in July, we looked obviously at going back to school, how the schools are moving forward. One of the key findings that we had is that per pupil payments, unsurprisingly, is really changing across the states. In some states, it's going down as much as 10%. We had schools reporting in North Carolina that they were planning on a 10% decrease in the per pupil payments, and they were building this into their budgets to accommodate these changes or these potential changes at the time that they were creating their budgets. In other states like Pennsylvania, for example, we saw education budgets were being renewed at the same full year 2019 levels. Those were being carried over to full year 2020. And actually in some localities within PA, there was an increase in per pupil payments because of local contribution levels slightly shifting as well. Another key area that we wanted to focus on, and I'm sure obviously schools were concerned about this too, is are students returning, and what does student retention look like at charter schools after education systems really took a hit this year? And we're happy to say that we received a lot of positive feedback on the student retention. In North Carolina specifically, we had schools reporting that not only were all of its students returning, but enrollment was actually up. They took, I think it was 3% from their wait list was converted to full-time students, and that kind of helped to offset some of those state budget cuts. And of course, we've had some time pass since the first school closures started and since COVID has really hit. So there's been time to play around with distance learning strategies and learn what's successful, what's not. So as really compared in the March voluntary disclosures with the July voluntary disclosures, there was a lot more concrete learning plans laid out and how schools are going to deliver their education was a little bit more concrete, although nothing is ever really concrete these days, but it was a little more hammered down. And so all that is to say that this just keeps investors informed and, staying transparent, not only at the school level or the CMO level. That's one component of it, but by doing that, it spills over into the market as a whole and really just creates a transparent charter school bond market, which can stave off any big investors from having these large-scale market exits because of uncertainty in the charter school bonds. And so just one last thing I want to quickly touch on. We're keeping our eyes on the academic metrics as we always do, but especially this year, we're looking at how those may evolve given that, education is being delivered differently and standardized testing in a lot of places is getting the axe or getting relooked at, or at least it has in this past spring semester for a lot of schools. So it's reasonable to think that our measures of academic excellence will be shifting too. School Improvement Partnership is actually building out a large-scale database, and one of the data points that we have in that is the school report cards ratings for schools. So we'll be really looking at how that changes in certain states and there's a lot of other metrics that go into that too. So if you have more questions about that database, you can certainly reach out to us. We'd be happy to share. But really, at the end of the day, it's another method that we're using to keep communication channels with the investors open as we continue to evolve in this 2020 landscape.